But I would say a lot of internalized racism. So I was like ashamed of my food in Australia. I had really good thịt kho, pork belly for lunch, but I would hide it because the white girls would be like, oh, that's so stinky. So I was really shy of my culture.
Sure. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Sky. Today I'm going to talk with Viet Kieux living in Vietnam on how their parents migrated abroad and why they chose to come back to live in Vietnam and much more. If you're new here, welcome. If you'd like to see more interviews of locals and foreigners in Vietnam, hit the subscribe button, and until then, let's get started. Hello, thanks for joining. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is David Nguyen. So actually I was born in New York. I grew up in Alaska and then I moved to California when I was about 21 and now I'm here living in Vietnam.
My name is Monica. I'm from Australia and I've been here for 1 month.
Welcome.
My name is Van. I am ethnically Vietnamese but born in France and I've lived in Vietnam for the past 8 years.
How did your parents migrate to America?
I actually don't really know much. All I just know is they left Vietnam when they were 20. Right when my mom got to the US, then I was born. So she wasn't even there for that long. And then I came into the world. I never really asked them too much stories about it. I don't really know that much from like my parents' point of view.
How did your mom migrate here? Was it through plane, boat? Was it after the Vietnam War?
It was after the Vietnam War because my mom wasn't born until 72. So my mom was only actually 20 years older than me. So we're 20 years apart. She was born in 72. So I think the war didn't really affect her as much. At least not that I know of, or they don't tell me much about Vietnam.
How did your parents migrate to Australia from Vietnam?
So my dad stole a boat and
When?
I don't know, like maybe 90s. He came to Hong Kong at a refugee camp and at the refugee camp they put you on different places. So he was just placed in Australia.
So they sent him from Hong Kong to Australia?
Yeah,
Your dad's a pirate.
basically. Crazy stuff.
How did your parents migrate to France from Vietnam?
So my parents are quite old. They were born in the early 40s. They actually are from relatively affluent families, merchant families. I guess they had the means to follow the French education system in Vietnam, which back then you had a dichotomy between those going to Vietnamese schools and those going to French schools. They happened to go to French school all throughout primary school, middle school, high school, and after graduating high school, it was natural for them in the early 60s to go and have an education abroad because that's what wealthy family did, send their kids abroad so that they would learn and bring the knowledge back to the motherland. My dad left when he was 21 years old, hopped on a plane, landed in France, tell stories of how shocked it was being alone for the first time in France. My mom was somewhat a similar story, but she went to university in Vietnam, graduated, then had an opportunity to work in France for a French company. So they've been in France now 60 years, and in comparison, they've lived 20 or so years in Vietnam only.
How was your experience growing up as a Viet Kieu in America?
For me, I never had an issue with my identity, which I think a lot of Asian Americans struggle with. It's funny actually with the term Viet Kieu. When I grew up, I've always known myself as người Mỹ gốc Việt, not Viet Kieu. Because before I actually learned that term was Viet Kieu means that you were a Vietnamese person who was born and raised in Vietnam and then you moved to a different country. For me, I have always identified with the term người Mỹ gốc Việt because I was born in the US. Obviously, I'm more American than I am Vietnamese. Vietnamese American also means to me is a hybrid of two identities. So I never had a struggle. I knew I was Vietnamese in the States, but when I come home, I knew that I'm Vietnamese with my parents. And when I went out of the house, I never struggled with like, oh, am I American or am I Vietnamese? Like, I'm Vietnamese American. So when I step outside of the house, like, I'm American. And like, I've never had anyone who was racist toward me. I guess I was lucky in that sense. I grew up in a very diverse community. But I think now the term Viet Kieu, people just kind of encompass everything, whether you're born in Vietnam or you're born in another country.
How diverse was your community growing up? Was there a bunch of Vietnamese people, different ethnicities?
I never grew up around a lot of Vietnamese people. I actually grew up around other ethnicities. Most of my friends were Hmong, Mien, Thai, Laos, Cambodian, and other races as well. Like I had Samoan friends, black friends, white friends. The community that I grew up in Alaska, in a town called Anchorage, Alaska, there weren't a lot of Vietnamese people. There were more adults than Vietnamese kids, or at least each Vietnamese family, they'll live in different areas of Anchorage. So there would be only like one or two Vietnamese person in each school. So I never knew any Vietnamese person in my school, even in elementary.
It was pretty mixed. I grew up in a predominantly white area, so I had a lot of like internalized racism growing up. But I feel like my parents did a really good job at keeping the culture back home. They told us to speak Vietnamese. That was the rule. Speak Vietnamese in the house, speak English outside. And they really introduced us to the food and everything. But I would say a lot of internalized racism. So I was like ashamed of my food in Australia. I had really good thịt kho, pork belly for lunch, but I would hide it because the white girls would be like, oh, that's so stinky. So I was really shy of my culture.
Where in Australia are you from?
I live in Sydney, grew up there like my whole life since I was one.
I never really had a sense of what Viet Kieu was. All I knew growing up in France, in a suburban Parisian city, I was the only Asian kid at school. So it was a town that we called Black Blanc Beurre, which means literally black. You Americans would probably say black American, but blanc, white, beurre, which literally means butter, but refers more to brown-skinned color. There I was, the only yellow-skinned kid in the school. So I was very much French, as in French in the sense of French integration in the public system, and Vietnamese at home. My sense of being Vietnamese at home was through the language, through the family rituals, through being connected to my uncle, aunts, and cousins. And that was the extent of our Vietnameseness. I never had Asian friends growing up, let alone Vietnamese. We lived in the western suburbs when most, I would say, Vietnamese families would either live in the southern suburb or the eastern suburb of Paris. To answer the question, I don't know what it is to be Viet Kieu. All I know is to be French, tinted with some Vietnameseness at home.
What was your reason for coming back to Vietnam? Is this your first time here?
No, it's not my first time here. The first time I came to Vietnam, I believe when I was 5 years old. And then after that, we were coming almost every year until my parents split. So then I didn't come back for a long time, I think more than 8 or 10 years. But now as an adult, I think the first time I came back was when I was 24, 25. I don't know, there's something about Vietnam that I connected to. And I know I'm coming from a privileged point of view. I feel more liberated here. The reasons why I came back is to just kind of do soul searching. I wanted to put myself out there, live in a different country that I don't really know much about. I mean, I know the culture from a certain point of view, obviously from my parents, but just truly immerse yourself into a different country, to learn Vietnamese more, just to kind of explore the world. I wanted to use this as a hub to travel around Asia as well.
I've lived in Sydney my whole life, being like bored of it basically. I just wanted to change of scene. I wanted to be somewhere different. Vietnam fulfilled that, going back to the motherland.
What's it like living here in Vietnam versus your home country of America?
There's something about Vietnam that just feels more relaxing to me in a way. Like for example, I think the one thing that I need to do every time I come to Vietnam is to ride a motorbike. A lot of foreigners or people who don't live in a country with motorbikes, the first thing that they're scared of is like riding a motorbike. I feel relaxed and free when I drive a motorbike. I don't know, for me, I just understand how the traffic flows. How I interpret the traffic is kind of like a river. The traffic just kind of freely moves. And yeah, it does seem chaotic, but there's a organized mess. Yes. To it, right? So you basically just follow along with the traffic. And of course, like in nature, sometimes like a boulder or a tree will fall into the river, right? And it'll kind of change the course of the river, if that makes sense. Since we're both from Cali, the number one thing is traffic. You can sit in traffic for like an hour, 2 hours. Here, I think people don't really work too far. I think the most they'll work is maybe 30 minutes. 30 minutes is usually far for a Vietnamese person. I rarely hear that anyone would drive like 40 minutes an hour, only if they really have to. For them, far is like more than 15 or 20 minutes. At least I think that's what in my opinion is.
I love it. It's something new every day. You never know what you're going to see. It's so stimulating. Being on the street, there's motorbikes and so many stores. There's so much happening. So your brain is like, wow. But also there's a lot of trust issues. I'm more on my toes. I'm like, who's scamming me, etc. Whereas everything in Sydney is like established back home. There's like the law, there's this, there's that. Things are more clear. $10 means $10, but in Vietnam it's like $10 means someone else is paying like half of what you're paying. It's a lot more thinking. It's more stimulating.
Could you elaborate more about being on your toes and the scamming part?
Because I'm clearly foreigner, I like dress different naturally, and I'm more tan, they know I'm foreigner. So basically they will rip you off like more, which is a part of the hustle. I respect it, but it's really like opportunities. So if they see you're different, they'll be like, yep, she's foreigner. I'll be more likely to probably rip her off. For example, like the gym, I found out recently, not naming the gym, different people pay different prices. She wanted to charge me $2 million a month, but I read on Reddit that a Vietnamese local was paying $8 million for the whole year. So in Australia, let's say $50 a month. Everyone pays $50, it's a package. But in Vietnam, different people are paying different things.
What's something Vietnam has that isn't back in Australia?
Really, really fresh food. The meat I buy in the morning is like chopped up in the morning and sold the same day. A lot of things back home are like a lot more processed. Chill road rules. You can see 4 kids and a dad on a motorbike. Back home, it's really rules and regulations and a lot more karaoke. Yeah, you don't get that in Australia. Noise pollution, there's also a lot more because of like the karaoke.
It's nothing like waking up in the morning to local karaoke.
Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge or difficulty you face as a Viet Kieu living here in Vietnam?
The number one thing is, I would say, the language barrier. Well, okay, so I can speak Vietnamese at a conversational level. Of course, there will be times when, like, I don't understand certain words. But the one thing that I think is very difficult is when you go to the hospital or any building that you need to kind of line up for, there is no line. So you kind of just have to fight your way to get to the front. And it's been a struggle for me because I'm someone who can be passive. So I'm used to just like knowing where to stand to line up, right? But here, if you're not aggressive, you kind of won't get what you need. Especially when in the hospital, like I just have to try to push my way to the front. It sometimes like it makes me very anxious, especially when I went to the DMV to get my bike license. There was barely no sign. I don't read Vietnamese that well, so I didn't know what the sign says. And then I tried asking someone, and they're like, read the sign. I was like, I can't read. And she was like, well, if you can't read Vietnamese, how are you going to get a license? I'm like, well, that's why I'm asking you. like I need help. In those environments, there's just no customer service, and you just kind of have to like deal with it.
But in the end, you will eventually get what you want, but maybe not in a timely manner.
As covered before, the scam, that kind of stuff, but also perceptions on how you're perceived. So when I got here, I kind of had an identity crisis because I wasn't accepted as Vietnamese fully, but I wasn't seen as fully white foreigner. So you're like in the middle, you're like a hybrid, like a rare breed. And also people thinking you're rich. A lot of people think like you're really, really loaded or lucky. Like, wow, she's so rich, she's Viet Kieu, she has to be. That's not always the case. It's just a difference in currency.
Here in Vietnam, I'm trying to navigate my dual culture, but I don't really identify as either. It's very funny because in a sense, I never feel at home. When I grew up in France, I felt very Vietnamese. When I studied in Canada, I felt very European in my values. Living here in Vietnam, I feel very Western, globalized in a sense. So I've always had those 3 pillars linked up together in me. I'm always on a balancing act and never fully anchoring my foot in the place I am, because I guess I grew up with the notion that it was more enriching to cultivate the difference.
Pros and cons of living in Saigon.
One thing about that I enjoy living in Vietnam is it's a busy city. There's a lot of things you can do here. And I never realized how easy to have access to these things because you have different things going on. So if you're interested in learning a language, you can go find a language class. It's affordable. There are different type of clubs like hiking clubs, or if you want to do meetups with other people, because I think everyone who comes here, they are kind of in the same mindset. Like they're here, they want to meet people. So there are different like creative clubs as well that you can just kind of try to connect with people. I think con would be the pollution, air pollution. That's number one thing. And then trash. It's not the cleanest. I mean, there are parts where it is clean. You can easily find trash on the ground everywhere. Going back on the air pollution, it's funny because when I was younger, I didn't get sick a lot when I came here, but for some reason, the whole of last year when I was here, I got sick every single month. I had some type of cough or some type of cold, flu. I don't know if it's because I'm aging now, so I can feel it more. When I ride a motorbike, obviously I have to wear a mask so that you don't breathe in all the dust and
all the smog, exhaustion from the bikes.
Exactly. I think also the heat. I mean, of course, I knew it was going to be hot, but maybe global warming, but it just feels like it's getting hotter every year. So in Saigon, there's only two seasons. There's a dry season and the rainy season. So last year when I moved here, I moved right during the dry season. I moved here during the hottest month, which is March. I was dying. I went from 70 to like 100 degrees, so it was a big jump. So it took a while for my body to adjust. This year, it just felt like it got even hotter. And the other thing I have to say is about sanitation. I had to lower my health expectation. I wouldn't say I'm a germaphobe. I can be detail oriented. I can notice certain things when it comes to healthcare. Not insurance, but like to making sure things are clean, right? And then when you go out to eat also, sometimes you don't have access to a bathroom or a toilet. And a lot of the toilets and bathrooms don't have soap or paper towels. I mean, I guess I understand that's to help the environment. There's no soap. Like I can air dry my hand because I think it's more...
Sometimes you have to bring your own like towels.
I had to get used to not washing my hands before I eat because that's what I used to do. I would wash my hands all the time before I eat, before I touch anything. But now I just kind of have to like deal with it.
Let's start with the pros. Fresh food, number one. Big tight-knit culture. Everywhere you go is really cultural. So even at a restaurant, there'll be like a Buddha shelf that I love. Another pro is it's so fun and fast and convenient. Incredibly efficient. You will like book an appointment. They'll be like, oh, you can see me tomorrow or like in 2 days. Cons, I would say, again, less clearness and laws and regulations. Stuff isn't clear. The weather could be a factor foreigners have to adjust to. There can be flooding. It's really hot in Ho Chi Minh. One con I don't like is you can smoke anywhere. So there's less laws around that. Can be eating and a guy will be like smoking inside the restaurant. That I don't personally like.
Pro, it's easy to get anywhere. It's easy to fly back to America if you need to. It's easy to fly back to Europe. At the same time, I'm also close to my favorite diving destination. So I'm a scuba diver, and I know, Sky, that you're also a free diver. I'm very, very happy here in my backyard. The cons, a bit sensitive. The pollution might be a bit irritating to you, but I guess it's the lifestyle that I chose for myself to be in emerging countries. It's part of the package.
How's your Vietnamese? Can you say something?
Xin chào mọi người, tên mình là David. Mình sinh ra ở Mỹ và lớn lên ở Mỹ. Hiện tại thì sống ở Việt Nam. Thì bây giờ đang interview với Sky, right? So yeah, that's my Vietnamese.
It's better than mine, I'll tell you that.
I think the question I get asked a lot is actually a lot of people think that I was born in Vietnam and then I moved to the States. When I speak Vietnamese, they'll be like, oh, em sang ở Mỹ bao lâu rồi? So that means like, when did you go to the US? And I'm like, đâu có, mình đẻ ở Mỹ mà. Yeah, and they're like, oh, what, really? The comment that I get a lot from my Vietnamese is actually I don't have a strong American accent when I speak Vietnamese. I guess I learned to kind of be more appreciative of my experience with that. I never struggled with speaking Vietnamese because I've always knew when I get home, I speak Vietnamese with my parents, and when I leave the house, I speak English. So I never had that struggle with my languages. One time I went on a grab, and the guy, he didn't pick up that I had an American accent, or at least he couldn't hear it. He's asked, "The way mới lên hả?" So he's asking, did I come from the countryside? He thought I came from the countryside. I just got to the city. And I was just playing along. I was like, oh, yeah, sure. Because I didn't want to tell them that I was American.
Yeah, you don't want them to charge you extra.
Although, yeah, that's definitely the other thing. Yeah. If they find out you're a foreigner, they're going to upcharge you. I was just playing. I was like, yeah, I don't know the streets of Saigon. Sorry.
Tên em là Monica và em thích đi ăn vặt. Em thích Việt Nam tại vì là người ta rất thân thiện và ở ngoài đường kiểu có nhiều đồ ăn rất ngon và bún măng vịt là món sở trường của em ở Việt Nam.
Yeah, after 8 years, I would say I can be proficient, but I still sound because of an accent. Yes, I do have one, but also because I learned an older Vietnamese from my parents who left Vietnam in the 60s. Anything beyond that, my parents did not know, therefore, ergo, did not teach me. Et oui, donc je m'appelle Van, je suis né en France et j'ai vécu en région parisienne, dans la banlieue ouest. Donc si vous connaissez le château de Versailles, j'ai vécu pas très loin. Tôi tên là Văn, giọng của Văn cũng là giọng Bắc. Người Hà Nội hồi xưa ở đây, ở Sài Gòn thì không phải là một cái vấn đề. Người ta thì không có đánh giá Văn như là người Bắc bây giờ. Cho nên mọi người ở đây khá là dễ thương đối với Văn.
What advice would you give to any Viet Kieu considering moving to Vietnam?
Although Vietnam is very cheap, if you're coming from obviously a country that has a more stronger currency, you can easily fall into the trap of just spending a lot of money because you're like, oh, it's cheap. So you just keep spending, and you realize like I went way over my budget. So it depends on if you're coming here on vacation or if you're moving here. Prepare yourself financially. And I think the other thing is culture shock. If you haven't been exposed to another country or maybe the type of life here, then it could be a shock to some people. I think for me, since I was introduced to Vietnam when I was 5 years old, I already have an understanding of Vietnam's life is like, but obviously living as someone who's a little bit more privileged, it is slightly different, but I know that.
Learn a bit of the language. It goes a long way and help. Like, thank you, cảm ơn. Don't come into it with expectations. Don't try to compare too much with your home country and be open to things. I've met people who are like, I don't go to the toilet in Vietnam. I heard one girl say that. I was like, where do you go? And she was like, in a fancy shopping center. So I definitely think you need to be open to adjusting of life here, like sitting on the street eating. It's not the place where you can be pretentious or expect things like back home. And if anything, it's very grounding and authentic. Just be grounded and humble.
Don't be shy about it. At the same time, don't expect to be a king here or to be a prince here. Viet Kieu is a double-edged sword. You are a brother when it suits them. You are a cash cow when it suits them. You are family when it suits them. Take that into consideration, but mostly do it for yourself. Be humble. Don't come to Vietnam thinking you know everything, because what you know might not be adaptable or suitable to this society. Vietnam is, I feel, a country that looks outwards a lot to find itself. For sure, you will have something to bring in, but it is longing for its own model. Bringing what you can, what you feel is going to bring worth and value here to the community, and put them first.
If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. What did you think? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you'd like to see more interviews of locals and foreigners in Vietnam, hit the subscribe button. And until then, I'll see you again. Bye-bye.